Welcome, and in this video we have some Scrambler news to discuss.
Just when you thought there couldn't be any more factory scramblers, here comes Norton.
Norton has announced their new Atlas model, and it comes in two variants, the Atlas Nomad and the Atlas Ranger.
So both motorcycles will have a 650cc engine, 84 horsepower, and 47 pounds of torque. Will only weigh 392 pounds dry, just like my wine.
The Nomad is the standard version with an 18-inch front tire, a 17-inch rear, and 5.9 inches of suspension travel.
The Ranger, however, is more off-road aggressive. It has a 19-inch front tire, and it has 7.9 inches of suspension travel. Ladies, that 2-inch really counts.
Not cheap by any means, but considering the price of a Commando, it's a very friendly entry point into the prestige of Norton motorcycles.
The question is how will they do in such a saturated market? Well, let's see how they compare to their competition. Oh, the competition between Triumph, BMW, Ducati, and Indian.
Okay, so let's compare the Norton Atlas Nomad against the BMW R9T Scrambler, the Triumph Street Scrambler, the Ducati Scrambler Icon, and Indian's FDR 1200, which isn't out yet. Right off the bat, and this is going to be a trend for both the Nomad and the Ranger, you can kind of see who it seems they're really most going for. And I guess that'd be the Ducati Scrambler Icon, because they're the most similar in specs. And that makes sense because Ducati's probably been the most successful with their Scrambler series because they turned Scrambler into a brand. It's not just one motorcycle or two motorcycles. I mean, it's a complete brand within a brand, which is pretty interesting. I mean, they're selling Scrambler shirts, they're selling Scrambler gear. You know, they're putting Scrambler on everything and selling it. And some of the bikes in their Scrambler line aren't even really Scramblers, right? So it's interesting what Ducati's doing. But so, you know, compare it to the BMW, and the BMW is going to weigh a ton more. It's going to actually cost a little bit more, but it has a lot more power. It doesn't have the suspension travel that the Norton has. Character-wise, I can only imagine how different these bikes are going to be. So compare it against the Triumph Street Scrambler, and you know we can see we're getting ahead of it in as far as being a nicer, more boutique bike, so that's coming with a higher cost. But on paper, at least, it's outperforming it, right? It's got more horsepower. But yeah, the suspension travel on the Street Scrambler doesn't compare. 1.2 inches below that of the Nomad. Seat height, though, on the Street Scrambler is one of the more friendly bikes here. And weight, the Street Scrambler loses again on weight to the Nomad. So, you know, on paper, the Nomad looks like it wins. But, you know, it's definitely one of those things, it's going to be highly dependent on how it rides because every one of you that has a Street Scrambler, you know, the Street Scrambler rides really well, and it's a hoot of a bike to ride. And a lot of times when people have reviewed the Street Scrambler against the R9T and the Scrambler Icon, even though the other two on paper win on specs, they always choose the Street Scrambler as being a more fun bike to ride. And I think a lot of that is just that low-end torque makes it a lot more appealing. So, and then comparing against the Scrambler Icon, you can see they're spec to spec. They're like on par with each other. I mean, it looks like Norton just said, hey man, let's go for an Icon and let's make sure that all our specs match or exceed it, right? So the only thing that the Atlas Nomad has over the Scrambler Icon on paper is about 11 horsepower. Even the tires are about the same. Suspension travel is the same. Seat height is a little taller on the Nomad. Weight is comparable. The Ducati beats about 11 pounds, but that's not too much. But the Nomad cost $3,000 plus more, so almost $4,000 more. So that's something to consider. Norton is definitely a smaller company than Ducati, though. So I would think Norton is a more boutique manufacturer. They make a lot less motorcycles. They're not as big of a company. So with that comes a higher cost. Actually, and another thing is their bike's supposed to be mostly metal. They're not saving money with plastic on the motorcycle like the Ducati is. So, you know, things to consider. Of course, the downside of being a more boutique dealer as well is less dealerships. And then we look at the Indian FTR 1200. And this is probably one of the bikes I'm most excited for next year. And you can see the FTR has a lot more power, has same suspension travel, actually has an 18-inch rear wheel and a 19-inch front, so that's interesting. Indian's winning on paper a lot. Competitively priced, at least the base FTR against the Atlas Nomad. But the weight, you're talking almost 100 pounds more dry. So, and supposedly the FTR will carry its weight well with the gas kind of going underneath the seat. But you still, I mean, if you're actually going to get off the pavement, you can't really beat 100 pounds lighter. All right, let's look at the Ranger now compared to the same brands, but their beefier version. Now on the BMW R9T Urban GS, the bike is essentially the same. You get a little higher of a seat height, but I guess essentially it's the same bike. It's just a little bit of a styling exercise. I've heard some people comment that if they feel a little different. So once again, the BMW is going to win on power, but it's going to lose on suspension travel. It's going to lose on weight. Well, it's going to win on cost. So it's going to win on cost, and it's going to win on power, and it's going to lose on everything else, except for maybe shaft drive. Because then, not messing around with the chain would be nice. Now, comparing against the Scrambler, the Triumph Scrambler XE, the Ranger would kind of more line up with the XC Scrambler. Even then, the XC Scrambler will be priced lower. So, we're still 2 weeks away from knowing the price of the XE, but I imagine it's going to be around $16,000. So they're going to be competitive. I expect the Triumph to be a little bit more than the Ranger, but they'll be competitive. But, the Scrambler is going to have just a lot better on paper, 21-inch front tire, similar power, but the torque down low, and then a lot more suspension travel. The new Scramblers from Triumph are going to be in a league of their own, I think. They're going to be more in the adventure bike category, unless that's the modern classic Scrambler category. Comparing the Ranger against the Desert Sled from Ducati, you'll see again pretty matched up. The Ranger's got slightly more power still. The suspension travel is the same. And what's interesting here is the Ranger beats Ducati on weight, where the Ducati Scrambler Icon beat the Nomad by, almost 10 pounds. You got the Ranger beating the Desert Sled by just over 30 pounds. Again, what you're going to lose is that price. So again, the Desert Sled coming in at $11,395 versus $15,500. You're talking over $4,000 difference to own a Norton versus the Desert Sled. And again, Norton's going to have less dealers. So, is that $4,000 price difference going to be worth owning a Norton? It depends on how much you love that brand. And, if you've always wanted to own a Norton, which I wouldn't lie, I wouldn't mind. I can't afford one, but I wouldn't mind. It's going to come down to how the bike rides. Again, I think it's going to be a lot less plastic. I don't know. I would have a hard time choosing between the Ranger and the Desert Sled if I was in the market for one of those two. It's tough. I mean, on paper, they're very similar, but it's going to really come down to how they ride, and will the Norton ride so well and perform so well off-road that it justifies spending more money? Or will someone just want to own a Norton? And then to compare it against the FDR 1200S version, which is essentially the same as the standard version, but more color options, adjustable suspension, better display, if you like the LCD touch display they got. Yeah, I mean, again, the FTR wins on power, loses on weight, loses on suspension travel now when compared against the Ranger. It's interesting to see compared to the other motorcycles in its class. One of the things that's cool about this motorcycle is it sounds like they try to use metal as much as possible. The idea was that you could drop it off-road and you wouldn't just break some cheap plastic part that costs a shit ton of money from the dealer. You could just pick the bike back up and ride it home. So that's really cool. I dig all the metal on the bike. Obviously, Norton's a pretty famous name, and so a lot of people would love to have a Norton motorcycle. But even at their lower price point, it's still going to be an expensive bike. And there's a lot of great options in that price range. But for somebody who's a fan of Norton, who really wants to own a Norton motorcycle, which also has some great modern features like the LED headlight. So yeah, I mean it's a very attractive bike. It's far more attractive than at least half of the market, in my opinion at least. And I think it's gonna probably do really well. They're coming out with I think 250 of each for next year, but it's going to be a production model that continues on. It's just going to be I think a limited initial release. They're probably expecting high demand. It's safe to say that. I mean, like I said, I think it's a great looking bike, and Norton's cool. They offer actually the motorcycle in multiple colors. It's not, some brands like BMW in the past didn't offer a whole lot of colors for their R9T Scrambler, for example. I know they've changed that now, but in the past. So it is nice to see a couple different versions or variations on the color. Norton's a very popular brand, obviously. It's a very brand that people are passionate about. The price is a little steep when you compare it to some of the other models out there, but again, you're buying a Norton, and I think the kind of person that's buying a Norton, they're probably not driving Honda Civics. So, the price point probably won't affect their typical buyer, I would think. And it's low enough to be friendly to new buyers who want to get a Norton. I will love a test ride if I get a chance to. I doubt I'll have, with no dealers nearby, I doubt I'll get a chance to test ride one. But, just in case I ever do, then I'll do a ride review. But otherwise, I'm like you. I'm looking forward to seeing more news about it and hearing some other people's ride reviews. Thanks for watching. If you're new to the channel, this is a little pet project of mine. Caitlyn, Merrick, and I are trying to go around the world on motorcycles in a few years, and we want to kind of film everything and do weekly episodes. So this is my attempt at learning how to film and edit and do all this stuff. So if you want to come along for the ride, please subscribe. Take care and scramble on.